you about the questionnaire, survey, and a focus group. So basically, we are going to go to identify these data collection methods, and we are going to identify what are the, let's say, main points in order to do it if you are going to start your own research. However, if you can just give me a second so I can share my screen and I can start the session. Just a second. Okay, so Bismillah. As I mentioned, I will be identifying the idea of having a questionnaire or using the questionnaire. What is the difference between saying that this is a direct questionnaire and this is a survey that I could use a questionnaire or an interview or any other kind of method that we are going to mention? And plus, thirdly, I would be also identifying the focus group. Now, I'm going to go, as I said, with the basic information just to identify the concept to you, to all the students. And please make sure that if you have any questions or anything more for clarification, to stop me at any time of the session. So let's start. So first of all, in order to identify anything, usually we would go with the definition first. So what is a questionnaire? What do we mean by saying that we are going to use a questionnaire in any research? Now, as a research, it means that you are looking for something specifically. I'm sure with the previous sessions, you have identified already what is a research. So basically what we are saying here is that When you have an idea or an object or an aim for a research, it means that you are looking for answers. And one of the data collection methods is to use a questionnaire. So basically, when we say that we are going to plan to use a questionnaire, it means that we have a prepared set of questions, or we are going to prepare it by ourselves as one of the research team, for example, working on a research. So when we are going to say any written set of questions, it means that it is a questionnaire. Maybe you are participating in any questionnaire currently, or you participated before. So maybe you have a basic idea of what is a questionnaire, like the similar picture here. So you would have a certain questions. These questions will be related to a specific topic. This specific topic would be the main aim of your research. So when we are going to say that we are going to use a research instrument, the questionnaire, it means that we would have to gather an information that we would need the respondents to give it to us, which we usually call them the participants. So it means that I would have a set of questions and I would go to the targeted participants and I would ask them to respond to these questions. When they are going to respond, it would be with several methods, which could be face-to-face. So maybe I would use the questionnaire and I would go personally as a researcher to the participant or the respondent, or it could be by telephone in some cases, or it could be by computer. So it could be posted, for example, to the respondents by email, or it could be posted by the regular post, for example, fax or something as a paperwork or a hard copy questionnaire. Whatever method that I would use here, it would depend on my aim first of all. So what am I looking for and what would be the best way to get the results for it? So this is to identify it. Now, when we are going to say, why would I use a questionnaire? So why would I go for this option? Usually we are going to go with some general factors and some specific factors for the research itself. So as a general idea, we are going to say, as a questionnaire, it would be considered cheap and it would be quick and efficient in order to get a larger amount of respondents. So if I'm looking for a large sample, which means that I'm looking for a large number of participants to join the research, I could use a questionnaire because I can post it to several number of participants and I can wait for the response, for example. So it will not take a long time with me, depending on the method that I would use. And plus that, if I'm going to use a questionnaire, it means that as part of the research itself, I can have the quality of both, of having a qualitative data and a quantitative data. Now, for the one who doesn't know what is the differences here, whenever I say qualitative data, it means that I'm looking for the quality. I'm looking for an answers that would be as what the participants is thinking, for example, or what is their thoughts about a specific topic. And when I'm looking at the quantitative, it means that I'm focusing on the numbers. So I need, for example, an answer of how many participants is saying yes, for example, for a specific closed question. So it means that I'm going to use something called open and closed question. And this is something that we are going to look at today, just to make sure that you would understand if you are going to prepare a questionnaire or you are going to use a previously used questionnaire, what are you going to look for? So what is the differences between saying that this is an open and this is a closed questions? So we're going to start with the closed questions. First of all, whenever I say that it is a closed question, it means that there is a specific structure for the answer that I would expect, which means that I would either give the question to the participant and I would myself put an answer for the question. Either it would be 2 options or, for example, 5. It depends on the ranking and the data that I'm looking for. So if I wanted to look, for example, to see how many male participants is agreeing with the COVID-19, for example, vaccine, I would put the question, I would frame it in a way that it would specifically ask the participant, do you agree with the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, the third, let's say, vaccine now or not. If I'm looking specifically for the male category, I could put only male and female, and they can specify also for the questions if I wanted to say this is yes or no. So what do you think of? So this is something that I can use for both the quantitative and the qualitative, because I can see the percentage of how many numbers of male, for example, participants would say yes and how many would say no, and so on. Plus that, usually there is a rating scale that would be also used within the questionnaire, similarly to saying strongly agree or neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, and so on also. So it would depend on the rating that you would usually use. However, I have to make sure that one of the tips that I would do within the rating that I would choose, that it would be consistent, which means that the aim, as we said, of the questionnaire is to let them respond to the answers that I'm looking for. However, if I did not use a consistent scales, which means that I'm changing the rating scale between the questions, it means that I might myself make the participants or the respondent be in a way that they can change their answers without noticing or without being aware of it. Why? Because I'm changing also the scales. So they would be confused. What exactly am I looking for? So usually what we would say is either to go with the 5 rating, for example, for all the questions, or 2, or it would be specific on what is the category of the questions that you would use. So usually we are going to say, whenever you're going to use the questionnaire, you would give an introduction to the participant, for example, or you would write it and include it within the questionnaire. So they would have it as an instructions. Usually there will be also a specific alignment for the questions to make sure that they will not be confused and they will not go back and forth between the questions. So basically we're saying that it would be easier for them to know what are you looking for and to make it sure that they can answer it. Now, when we say closed question, it means that there is strength and there is limitations also, because anything that we would use within the research, it would have some strength and it will have some weaknesses. So in regards to the closed question, we are going to say that it is considered economically. As we said, looking from the general side. Why it is economical? Because we can use it with a larger number of sample size. So it would be given to a number of participants that I can say later on within the process or the phases of the research that I can generalize my results based on one of the factors. It would be the large sample that I get from the respondents of the questionnaire. So it would be called representative, which is one of the things that most of the researchers is looking for whenever they aim for a research. The second thing is that whenever I give the information, it would be easily converted. So it means that, like what we just said, in the answers of the yes or no questions, for example, I can turn it directly into quantitative data, which means I can see the numbers of how many participants say yes and how many participants said no as an answer to the specific questions, which means that I am giving myself the opportunity to have the statistical analysis easier to get it from the responses of the closed questions. And when we say analysis, it means that I am checking the results of the questionnaire and I am starting to work on these results. So I can analyze the data that I gathered from the response that I get from the questionnaire. Thirdly, also, we are going to say that it could be standardized. So the reliability usually is higher, which means that, remember from the beginning, I said that you can either create your own questionnaire or you can use a questionnaire that is used before. So what is the idea here? It means that if you are starting a questionnaire, for example, slide does not change. Yeah, I'm still in the strength. That's why I did not change it. Okay, if I'm talking about a questionnaire that I created, for example, as a researcher, and this is a topic that no one else has looked for from the beginning. So it means that I am now putting the set of questions that will give me the aim for the research. So it means that whenever I would build up this questionnaire, it means that this would be the first step, let's say, to use this questionnaire and this topic. However, if someone else is going to look for the same topic, it means that they can look for the questionnaire that I created and they can reuse it again, which means that they would replicate it easily. Why? Because it has been used before. It is proven with something called pilot studies that we are going to discuss a little bit today. And we are going to say that as a result, the reliability, which is to say that these are the accurate set of questions and the correct set of questions created for looking for the answers for that topic. So basically, I can say that a second researcher, they can use the same questionnaire that I can use, that I created, sorry, or vice versa. So if someone else before me looked for that same topic, I can use also their questionnaire. So this is also considered a strength of using any questionnaire that will include a closed questions focused on the correct topic. However, as anything else, we also have a weakness for using a closed questions only. Why? Because we are going to say the responses, as we said, it is fixed. So I am giving the options to the respondent. So they have to answer within these only options. However, this can sometimes affect their response in an indirect way with a negative way. Why? Because it could reflect their true feeling, for example, on the topic, but they cannot reply on it with details that is required from their side. So if you can see sometimes here in the university, when we give you surveys, a survey would include a questionnaire, which is a set of questions that you are usually giving your answers to. What we usually see after the analysis is that most of the questions, or we're not going to say most, but some of the questions, the response would be neutral. Why? Because maybe you are not agreeing with the topic or with the question, and you are not disagreeing. So what you would put is neutral, which means that I specifically pushed you in a way that you would choose the path to go with neutral because you are not going with any other option, which means that I limited what you can give me as a response to the questionnaire, unlike the open questions. When we say open questions, the first thing that would come to your mind, it has to be that the people or the participants, they can express anything that they would think. So they would give you the answer on their own words. So they can be giving you much detail than the one that we can build within the closed question, which means that it will give me more in-depth answers for the answer that I'm looking for. This is also requires more details because you need to make sure that the question is written in a way that would be easily understood by the participant, and it would be easily for them to write it in detail and discuss it. So you have to make sure that also you are going to prepare as a researcher to be able to check the details that you would have from the results, and to be able to analyze these qualitative data, because I'm looking here for what is called coding. So I'm going to look at the answers to the open questions, and I'm going to see what is the similarity, let's say, that I can see within the express of the participants that I got from the open questions. Now, what are the strengths of using an open question? First of all, because I'm getting these qualitative data, so it means that I can elaborate on my data. So I can see what is the opinion, for example, or the attitude that the participant would give me to that specific topic that I can get from that research aim, which is considered a strength while using the open questions. However, also it would have some limitations or some let's say obligations that would be included here, which would be, first of all, the time consuming. Because As we said within the closed questions, directly you can revert it into quantitative. So you can look at it from the numbers to analyze what is the answers. However, here it means that you are going to look at each answer and then you are going to analyze it. So it means that it is a time consuming here. It will take you as a researcher a longer time to check the results that you are going to get from any open questions from the questionnaire. So it will take you a longer time also to get what is the coding for the categories that you are going to use. Plus that, as we said, we are going to make sure that it will be written in an easy way for them to understand it. However, if it was not, or if you gave, for example, the questionnaire to someone who is less educated, considering the topic that you are looking for, it means also that you are limiting your answers. So it means that the participant can give you what they think of or what is their express regarding that specific question. However, their verbal answer here or their written skills here, it would be depending on their education. So maybe they don't have the full background, for example, about your topic. So if you're going to link it, let's say if it is a health questionnaire, you have to make sure that the focus of your health research, it has to be given to the right participant. So don't expect, for example, to give a questionnaire to an elderly patient, for example, asking them about specific details on what is the diabetic type 1, for example, or diabetic type 2, because they couldn't understand what you are asking for. So it means that also they cannot give you the answer. There is a question in the chat. Is it possible to make a question both closed and open by providing a blank or to fill if they look for? Yes, usually you would see that in some certain questions, you can start it as a closed question and they would put secondary that if you have any comments or if you want to provide a feedback, you can provide it. This again will depend on what are you looking for. So you can start to have a set of questions that would be suitable. But yes, you can have both on the same, for example, focus of your question. Now, whenever you are going to say that you are going to use a questionnaire, as we said, you have to make sure that you know how to design it. So how am I going to say that I am using the correct questionnaire for my research? First of all, you have to go through several steps that would be considered the important factors whenever you are going to design your own questionnaire. So first step is that you need to make sure that the aim of your research is clearly pointed out. So it means that what is the feature or what is the focus that you are going to investigate, and per each item that you are going to look in the questionnaire. So are you going to look for the gender information, for example, of your respondents? So it means that one of the questions has to include if the participant is a male or female. If you're looking at a certain age of patients participants is to respond to you, still also you need to make sure that one of the questions will give you the response of the patient's age or group. So, and so on. So it means that if you are looking for a specific aim, you have to make sure that it would be also applied on the questions that you are going to use. So for going back to the example that we give about the diabetic, if you're looking at diabetic type 1, for example, don't put any questions that will mislead the participants. So don't go to type 2 suddenly within the questions and then go back to type 1. Because first of all, you are putting something that would give you a longer time to analyze, a longer time to look at, and at the same time, it would be misleading to you also because you're not supposed to look at type 2 information or type 2 response. You're only focusing on type 1 and so on. The second is don't make your questionnaire very long because you need to make sure that whoever is going to answer to the questions, they have to see 3 points directly, which is that it is short, it is clearly for them so they can understand it easily, and it is to the point. So as we said, to the point, do not make it with any unnecessary questions. That is not the focus of your questionnaire. Second, when we say that it is clear, so they can focus on what are you looking for, and they can give you the response that you are asking for. Ensure that they can get the question easily without having to read the question several times to understand what do you mean, or that it is long, that once they reach the last or the part where the question will end, they have to go back again because they did not get the complete question. Okay, so what do we usually say? That also, if we're going to go back to the example of the surveys from the university, if I give you a survey that will include 50 questions, for example, in some point, you would have to put the answers, I know, without even reading the questions, right? Why? Because it is too long to answer it, because I gave you something difficult to be answering to, and you cannot focus on the questions itself. So you are thinking of just to complete the survey. I just want to complete it and finish it. That's why you are going to see that any questionnaire, it has to be built in a way that it will be short, but at the same time, it will cover all the aim of the research within the questions that you choose. Thirdly, we have to make sure that you have to do it on a small scale. This is a factor that you are going to use if you are building your own questions, which means that if you're not having any questionnaire, or if you looked for a questionnaire for the specific topic that you are looking for at your research and you couldn't find a questionnaire, it means that you are going to build it. Once you have to build a questions, it means that you have to test it first. How would you test it, or what is the benefit of testing it? It is only to say that you would get it as a feedback from the small scale of practice that you did. So it means if you are looking again at diabetic type 1 patients, you are going to include, let's say, 10 to 15 patients only at the beginning, because you are going to do something called pilot study, which will give me as a researcher the time to give the participants the questionnaire, and at the same time, the time for adjusting it before you actually start your own collection of data. So it means that before you start your main study, you would be already testing the questionnaire if it is already giving you the answers or not, or do you have to amend it, or do you have to omit anything and rechange it before you start your own study. Another factor is also to make sure that it would be specific and not general. When we say specific here, that it would be looking at the answer that you are looking for. So it will not be asking the participant to be influenced by any previous questions. So it will not be leading them as a researcher to a specific biased answer, because you want to make sure that your research, it would be given to the participants through the questionnaire that would give you the correct and the accurate results at the end, not to push them into the answers into specific. So for example, if I gave you a questionnaire looking at the feedback on a course, and I ask you to do it on the same day of the test, for example, what am I doing here? Indirectly, I am influencing you to answer with a positive idea. Why? Because you want to do the test, or you want to have the test in an easier way, let's say. Okay, this is not happening in reality. This is only an example, okay? So just to give you the idea is that you're not supposed to influence the participants by any previous factors, also within the questions itself. So don't give the question to the participant and then give a second question that would be influenced by the previous one. So they are not going to give you an answer based on the previous question, not their own correct idea or behavior or their attitude toward that specific question. Also, you need to look at the language of the questionnaire. If you are looking at participants who their own mother language, for example, is Arabic, so don't give them the questionnaire in English and vice versa, because you need to make sure that they can understand the language that you are using in the questionnaire. If you used a questionnaire in an incorrect language, it means that you are not going to give the accurate results that you are looking for. Plus that, the vocabulary, as we said, if you are going to target participants that don't have any background within the medical, so don't use medical terms like diabetic within type 1, type 2, and so on. Lastly, you need to make sure that it will also look professional. So you need to make sure that the design itself for the whole questionnaire, it would be professional and it will be clear and with concise instructions, because you need to make sure that if you are going to post it or if you are going to send it by email, so it means that you are not facing or you are not checking what is the response of the participants in front of you. So you cannot see their expressions, you cannot see their feedback directly. So it means that you need to make sure that you are going to include instructions of what is the research is about. Usually it will include also a consent form, which means that you would give the approval to be part of the research, plus that you would give them certain instructions that is related to the questions that you chose for the questionnaire. Now, there are usually some ethical parts that you have to look for with any research. The ethical issues that you might face and you have to look at whenever you are using a questionnaire is that you need to make sure that any information that would be given to you, whether you are going to get it because you send it by post, for example, so the address will be sent to you back from the specific address, so you would know the address of the participants, let's say, you need to make sure that it is confidential. So it means that usually within the questionnaire, we would not ask for anything personal. So you would not ask in the questionnaire, what is the name of the participant, for example, or you would not ask for any personal information from them. Why? Because this is something that would be considered sensitive topic that you're not supposed to include in any questionnaire to make sure that it would not identify the participant when you are going to use the answers in the questionnaire. So later on, when you start the analysis part of the collected data, you are not supposed to point out who is the one who answered whenever someone would be reading your research. So it has to be maintained confidential. Plus that, any part of the analysis here and looking at the results of the questionnaire, it has to be to a specific person who would be only responsible for that part, for example. So they would know that they would have to be obligated not to discuss the results with anyone who is out of the research team. Another ethical issue that you have to look for is how are you going to build it in a way that would be reducing any psychological harm on the patient? So if you are looking at something that would be can cause an embarrassment, for example, for the patient, something related to cultural, for example, thinking that we have in the country. So you need to make sure that you are not going to cause any harm on the patient, or they will not feel any psychological harm or effect whenever they are going to respond. So if you're looking at a psychological topic, let's say you want to see what is the results or the effect on a child who had lost one of their parents, for example, you need to make sure that the questions itself is not going to put them in at risk that they would have to be feeling an effect, a negative effect psychologically, that they would cause a harm or they would be having any risk on themselves. Plus that, lastly, you need to make sure, as we said, that you would have something called a section for the informed consent, because you need to make sure that whoever is going to join your research, they would have to know that it has to be voluntarily joining the research, which means that they have the option to complete the questionnaire. And if they wanted to withdraw, for example, from the questionnaire, what can they do? Or from the research, what can they do? And what do they have to follow in order to be taking out their answers from the survey or from the study, so you cannot use the information that they provided. So you need to make sure that it would be clearly giving them an idea of what exactly are you providing, or what are you looking for from these study or the survey that you are doing. So before we start with the survey, any questions about the questionnaires? Is it clear?
عندي سؤال على البايلوت تيستينج.
شو اتفضل.
هذا الحين المفروض بس انه انا اشوف اعطيه ناس يجاوبون واعرف منه الوقت واطلع منه الاغلاط، ولا حتى انه اعطيه مثلا كونسلتنت في نفس المجال هذا يعلمني اذا في شيء ناقص فيه وزي كذا؟
Yes, sometimes usually with the pilot, if you are expert on this topic itself, you can do it by yourself, or the research team would be the one who would do the trial here. If you needed an expert opinion, you can say that you used an expert opinion, but you have to make sure that you have to mention it on your research. So if you said that there is an expert in the field of my research, and I asked them to look at the results here of the pilot study, it means that you have to have a reason for it. So why did you look at the expert? So if you're not expert on your research, this is something that would have to be also clarified, because it means that maybe you are not supposed to look at this research from the beginning. So if you're not confident enough on your topic and you needed an expert, you have to have a valid reason to say that you looked for that expert. So yes, you can do it, but you have to make sure that it would be also mentioned. You have to have a valid reason of why did you look for an expert. Any other questions on the questionnaire? Okay, for the time consuming, because I think that I'm taking a longer time, I'm gonna go to the survey, but if you have any questions, then just stop me or write it in the chat, I will check it. Okay, so for the survey, we are going to say that a survey is usually a research method. It's not a research instrument, but it's a method usually generally for collecting data. Now, in order to collect data, I would say that I would gain the information for the topic that I'm looking for or the interest for my research. It means that here I would usually obtain the data from standardized procedure, which means that I would look at the answer of the questions, for example, that is in the field that I'm looking for, and I would have to make sure that I would avoid something called biased opinion. So whenever I would say that I would go for a questionnaire, for a survey, I have the choice to say I can use a questionnaire, so it has to be part of the research instrument that I would use to collect the data on my survey. It would be through using a questionnaire that we just explained. So when I'm going to use this questionnaire, as we mentioned, within the buildup of the questions, you have to make sure that you're not going to build something called bias. So you have to make sure that the bias risk here is avoided as much as possible. What do you mean by biased opinions? It means that you are not going to externally affect the response of the participants, which means that you are not going to lead them into a specific answer in order to get a specific results. Now, whenever you are going to do a survey, yes, you can use a questionnaire, and it could be either online or offline, which means that you can distribute it in different methods. So you can use the social network, for example, you can use an email. Sometimes you would see that in certain research, they would use the QR codes, for example, that would be appropriate or applicable to their interest, or you can use an URL, which is the links that you can also provide to a larger number of sample that you are looking for. This is usually the advantages of using an online survey, specifically within our let's say years currently or the updates currently. It is pushing you to go with the digital networking. So whenever you would go with the digital, it will also affect any research that you would use. So if you are looking for an online survey that would be suitable to your interest, what are the advantages that you are going to get from? It would be, first of all, the accuracy. And when I say the accuracy here, it would be the accuracy of the study itself, not the data. Why? Because it means that the error of having any mistakes or anything that would be incorrectly, for example, written, or any buttons that you are going to put on your survey, it would not be a higher risk here because you are using an online method. So the margin here of the error, it would be lower. Plus that, you can make it also easier for you and quicker to analyze the data, because you can also link it to one of the analysis systems that you can get also on the computer. So you can forward the data directly and you can get the data more easier in real time. So it will not take a long time to analyze the data as if you are using the hard copy or the offline method. Another thing is that the grade bonding that you are going to get from the exercise itself, because you can see the similar brand language that you can give the patient or the participant for. So it would be considered an advantage to get it from the respondents, to get it in an easier language that they can get. And it would be an exercise that they can answer in any time, or a survey that they can respond to wherever they are in. Plus that, any participation, it would be easier because whenever they are going to have the appropriate time, or they would have the free time to answer, they would give you their response. Plus that it would have to make sure that the responses can be honest and flexible, because basically, whenever the respondents they are going to have the enough time to answer the questions, it means that they are also having the enough time to give you the correct and their own answers and their own feedback. So they will not be affected by having the pressure on the work, for example, or the pressure at home or so on. So they are not affected by anything else. So they would give you an answer, an honest answer. The template itself as a tool for the research, it will also give you the design that would be also considered an expert design, because you're using the online. So maybe some of you has heard about something called Monkey Survey, or the Survey Monkey, because it is a website currently that you can use as an online survey that would give you an easy steps in order to get a survey easily done, or to start your research and to conduct it in a very simple way than building it from the scratch or from the beginning. Now, whenever you are going to design a survey, it means that you have to, first of all, define your objective. So what are you looking for? Because if you don't have an aim, it means that also the results is not going to give you any planned feedback, for example. So you have to make sure that it would be planned in a way that you can deploy it and you can use it later on to build your analysis and to get what is the results that you are looking for. You have to make sure that it would be administered also in a correct way. So you have to make sure that the type of the survey, it will ensure that the number of the responses that you are looking for, it will also be available. So whatever is required for the study, it will also be applicable within the method that you are going to use the survey on. So if you are going to say that you use the questionnaire, what is the number of the participants that you are looking for? What is the detail of the questionnaire that you are looking for? And if you're using, for example, an interview, what you are looking for also, how many numbers do you expect that they would join the interview? And if still you are using, for example, a mix of both methods, you need to make sure that it would be also administered in a correct way. So if you are going to use a mix of interviews and a questionnaire, how are you going to do it? Do you have to do it by telephone, or you're going to do it face-to-face interviews by using the sets of the questions in the questionnaire, or how are you going to build it? So it means that you have to administer it in a way that you are going to fulfill whatever you are going to need or require for your study at the end. Also, you need to make sure to determine the sample size. Now, the sample size, it is a huge point here. We are not going to discuss it in detail because you are going to have a specific lecture for. However, here, just to mention that you have to make sure that the sample size expected, it has to be defined from the beginning. So how many do you think that would give you the correct survey response that will give you the required data for your survey? So how many participants do you think that they would also respond to the questions and they would give you the best insight in order to cover the interest of your research, for example? Do you have any questions about the survey? I did not go in further details because you're going to have also another session in regards to designing the surveys as a tool itself, as a research, sorry. So I did not put a lot of information here. So any questions before we go to the focus group? No? Okay. So the focus group is the last method that we are going to look at today. It is considered a method for using the interviews, but it is considered a group interview. So if you are looking for having a discussion or sharing the experience and the opinions between the participants, so it means that you are going to go for the focus group option, because usually the interviews, either it would be individual. So if you're looking at face-to-face with the participant and you need a lot of details that to be given from that specific individual without being affected by any other participant. So you're going to go with the individual interviews. However, if you are looking for a similar people that would have a shared, for example, experience, and you want them to share their opinion onto the interest of your research, it means that you are going for the option of having a focus group on your research to collect the data. Because basically, if you are going to go for a focus group discussion, it means that you are going to gain more in-depth of understanding, and usually it will be used for anything that would be related to the social issues or something for a specific interest that would include a discussion of a qualitative data. So it would be considered a qualitative approach in order to get a qualitative data, because here you are giving the participant the opportunity to give you everything that they would have as an answer in depth to the questions that they are going to raise within the group of the discussion. However, whenever you are going to design to use the focus group, it means that, again, you have to define the objective of the study, first of all. So you need to say, what is the purpose of saying that you are going to use the focus group? Why did you say that the focus group discussion, it has to be a better choice than to use the individual interview, for example? You need to make sure that you would have a key questions. So yes, you are going to allow them to discuss and to share their opinions, but still as a researcher, you need to make sure that it would be on the main topic that you are looking for. So it would not be expanded in a way that it would not be needed in your research. Plus that, anything that would be related to the ethics clearance, it has to be also defined from the beginning. So at the beginning of your focus group interview, you need to make sure that they would know what is the focus that you are going to do. So similarly to anything that you would start, like, for example, starting here the session, we mentioned from the beginning that you have the schedule for the workshop of the research. In the schedule, you have the topics that you are going to cover. In each topic, you are going to cover this and this and this. For example, now we covered the questionnaire, the survey, and now we're looking at the focus group. So we are defining it and we are making sure that it will be clear for you to understand what are we discussing here. Secondly, we need to make sure that it would be identifying and recruiting the correct participants, because here we are saying that you are collecting the data from these participants. So you have to make sure that you would recruit them in a correct way. And when we say recruit them, it means that you would have something called an inclusion criteria, which is the criteria of who is supposed to be in that part of the group discussion. So you would ensure that the humanities, for example, compensation, it would be also defined. So if you're looking for a topic that is related to the female, for example, gender, don't expect that you would recruit a male participant and you would look at the answers at the end and it would give you the required information, because from the beginning you did not recruit the correct participants. Also within their education, as we said, you need to make sure that whoever is going to participate, it would have to have their background also to help you within the answers that you are looking for, and the language of the discussion, for example, that you are going to use, and so on. So several factors that has to be defined first before saying that these are the correct group of participants that I would recruit on my focus group. Plus that here also, you need to make sure that you would define the number. So how many do you expect that would join you in the focus group? Are you going to open it into a further numbers, for example, reaching 15 or still? But usually we are going to say, go with over recruit by 10 to 25% than the number that you would initially put, because simply you cannot ensure that they would join the focus group on the scheduled date. So just make sure that you would have this over recruitment plan as a plan B whenever you are recruiting the participants. Another factor is to identify and recruit the facilitator, because usually we're saying that there will be a discussion, there will be a set of questions that would be chosen to be used on that focus group discussion. So it means that there is a facilitator. So similarly to Dr. Abdelmanem, for example, here, he facilitated at the beginning that I would start the presentation, and I introduced myself after he introduced me to you. So in the focus group, there will be someone to lead like this, what is going to happen within this focus group. And sometimes they would also have an assistant with them. Why do they have an assistant? Because usually they would have to make sure that someone also will be observing the response that they are going to get from the participants from the full picture. So they have to be flexible enough to know if they are affected in a negative way, or if they started to have any inappropriate, for example, results that you are not supposed to go for within your interest. Lastly, within the recruit participants factors is that you have to decide how many focus group questions also are you planning for. So are you planning for having a discussion with only one group or with several groups from the beginning? And if you're looking for a comparison, for example, between these groups, it has to be identified and defined from the beginning. Lastly, whenever you are going to design a focus group, you need to also look at the suitable location. So is the location that you are going to have the discussion is it accessible by the participants or not? So can they get to the location easily or not? Is it reasonably signed for their size or not, without any distractions? So they are not going to be distracted by any noises, for example, from outside the room or anything that is happening around them. So they are not going to affect their response. Plus that any material that you are going to need for the focus group, you have to be providing it before. So if you wanted to record, for example, the focus group, you need to make sure that you are going to have something to record it. So the recording equipment will be prepared before. If you are going to start the focus group, it means that still you are going to use the consent form. Usually you have to prepare it before. So it would be either a hard copy or it will be sent to the participants. In either way, it has to be arranged before starting your research. Plus that, if you are looking for an individual information from the participants, like having a tag for their names, if it is within the confidentiality that you are going to cover on your research, then it has to be also prepared before you would do your focus group. Now, when you are going to finish from the designing, you are going to come to the actual part of the practical session here, which means that you are going to start with something called pre-session preparation, which means you are going to familiarize the group itself with the dynamics. What is their seating preferences, for example? What is the equipment that you need to have before you start the actual discussion? Plus that, the recording duration that you have to put for each meeting. So you have to look at the environmental factors that you are going to have on the area for the preparation, to be prepared, before you start the actual meeting. Plus that, whenever you start the meeting, during the meeting itself, it has to be facilitated also correctly. Remember at the beginning, we said that you have to recruit a facilitator. Here, it would be the actual work or the responsibility of the facilitator. First of all, to introduce what are the conditions that you are going to, or the roles that you are going to follow within the discussion here. they have to discuss and observe everything that would be provided within the discussion here. They have to make sure that they are going to observe the non-verbal cues that they might see, for example, or view from the respondents of the participants. And they have to make sure that they are going to conclude or acknowledge the participants when they are going to finish the topic discussion, or if they are expanding in a way that they are going out of the topic interest. When you are going to analyze the focus group, it means that you have to look at either listening or ranking whatever answers that you got. Usually, if because there will be qualitative data, so also there will be a coding depending on the key ideas that would be and the answers to the interest of the questions, or you can build it as a theme within the similarity that you can get from the answers of the participants' answers. Or it would be content analysis or discourse analysis or conversion analysis, which means that you have to make sure that the type of the analysis has to be correctly applicable to the data that you are looking for. Lastly, you need to make sure also for the results. How are you going to decide that these are the targeted audience or not? So you have to make sure that the academics that you are going to look for, or the policy that you have to make sure that it would be within the practitioners and the participants, it has to be also clear. So when you are going to report anything that you got from this targeted audience, you need to make sure also that you would know how to report it in a way that you are going to decide who would be the one to benefit also from these results that you had from your focused group. Now, there are several types of the focus groups that we can go through also. Firstly, we can say that there is something called single focus group, and the key feature here, it will be to have an interactive discussion on a topic by the participants and a team facilitator, but it will be done as in one group in one place, so not several groups or several times or several locations. It would be only done mainly on one time, and it would be this is the commonly and the classic type of the focus group that is usually used in any group discussion needed. There are other types like having a two-way focus group, and when we say two-way focus group, it means that there is one group actively discussing the topic and the second group will also only be observing the first group. So if you are seeing what is the effect of the interest of your research and you want to see it by the observer's opinion also that are not from the research team, so you would do the two-way focus group. So inside the room, the first group of the focus group, they will be discussing the topic, and the second group would be out of the room and they would only be observing, and they would be leading you to what are the conclusions that you can see from the observation that they get from the interactions between the first group. Also, you can do a dual moderator, because you were saying that there will be a facilitator or a moderator. So you can do two moderators. They can be working together. So one would be performing a different role than the one that they are going to have on the focus group. So usually what you would do is they would define the roles before they would start the focus group. So they would have to focus on a smooth progression of the focus group, but each one would be with a different role to cover the topic. Or there will be a dueling moderator focus group, which means that two moderators would be having an opposing side. So on the issue itself that you are going to discuss or the interest of your topic, they would have a different opinions, because you want to see what would be the response of the respondents depending on what the moderator is also asking them or disclosing from the data that they are giving out, the information provided. So it would be depending on the interest that you would have within your research to see which one would be more suitable to be used as a method. There is another type, it's called the respondent moderator, because whenever you are going to see the moderator checking the response of the focus group, sometimes the researcher would give them the lead here in order to impact or affect whatever they are going to continue. So you would have a set of questions to be used, as we said, and it has to be valid and honest to get the honest responses. However, we can say that sometimes they would allow the moderator to a little bit omit or change the way that they are going to have the discussion based on what they are getting from the focus group responses. Or you can use a mini focus group, and usually this is a situation where you would have a small number of participants only for getting it in the focus group discussion. This is an option that you can look for if it is required to use a focus group, but you don't have a lot of participants. So if you are in a place, for example, that due to the circumstances, you don't have a lot of number of participants to join you due to their expertise, for example, or their background, yes, you can still use the focus group, but you have to make sure that this method, it would include only the mini focus group number, because usually the number in the focus group, it would be between 4 to 15 at least participants. However, if you're going to go with the mini, it would be between 2 and 5 participants only in the discussion. So it means here that you are going to use the qualitative approach to get the results. However, you don't have the number related to the generalization that you would get from the topic itself, but still it would be affected by your interest. So it will have to see within the topic of the research that you are looking for. Lastly, you can say that again, within the digital updating that we are getting within the worldwide, also you can use an online focus group depending on the situation. So you have to adapt within it doesn't mean that you have to adapt, within the untraditional method. So for example, if you are doing a research during the pandemic, let's say, of the COVID-19, you cannot put a lot of number of participants on the same group due to the health factors risk. So here you can say that you have a valid reason to say that you are going to go for an online focus group. So it would say that it will give the access to the participants, but you need to make sure that the platform that you are going to use also, it would be suitable and appropriate to whoever you are targeting. So if you are, for example, targeting someone who does not have an access to the internet, you cannot say that they are going to be recruited because they cannot join your focus group, because it would be within the loss of the connector, for example, or the failure that they can get, it would affect also your recording for the results, and you would not see any clear, honest, verbal data that you can get at the end of the focus group discussions. There are some strengths and weaknesses within the focus group that you are going to go through. First of all, whenever you are going to generate a discussion or a debate about the topic that you have for your research, it means that you have to require collective views. So you need to make sure that you are going to look at the opinions or the views that you are getting from the discussion of the participants. You need also to make sure that you are going to explore the topic and obtain the information or the narrative that you are looking for. However, what is it within the later stages of your research? So for example, if you are testing something, a narrative or an idea, you need to make sure that is it enough only to use a focus group, or do you still have to develop a questionnaire and you would have a mixed method of collecting the data? However, you need to also look at the quality and the challenge that you might see within the data. So usually we are going to say, if you're using a focus group, it is one of the techniques that would give you a ranking results through interviews. So it will give you a more feedback that you are going to get from the research participants, because it will give them the opportunity to have an in-depth discussion about the topic. So this is considered a strength point here. However, the limitations is that if you are raising what is the expected part from the participants also. Maybe you will not be fulfilling their part from their side. So maybe your strategic way of using the focus group, it has referred to the bias part, which is unanticipated from your side by the moderator or by the facilitator, which would not give you a good result at the end. Also, because you are going to say that it will depend on the discussion between the participants. So any dynamic factors here, it will also be raised, because sometimes you would see that some participants would be maybe hesitating to answer due to the effect of other participants available also within the focus group. So we need to make sure that you are going to limit this negative factor by recruiting the correct participants from the beginning, and you would have to know that their dynamic factors is not going to be applicable, it's not going to be changing within the discussion that they are going to have. So you would not have someone who is less educated with a higher educated participant on the same group, for example. Lastly, you need to make sure that because it will be providing you a depth and insight data, so it still does not mean that you can use it for numerical results, because you need to look at it from the qualitative data. So the statistical data that is required from the focus group, it would have a little bit a different type of analysis than to say that it would be used as a statistical or the numerical results that you would expect also. So you need to make sure that these are the limitations that you would reduce within the choosing the method of that data collection from the beginning, and you would say that it is appropriate and applicable depending on your research interest. So this is the recommendations that I would point out if you are looking for a focus group. First of all, have a clear rationale. Why would you use a focus group discussion? Second, focus on the facilitator skills, because it would depend a lot on the skills that they would have. So if they have, for example, to have built a robot or creating a warm, supportive environment, it has to be in a way that would make the participants very comfortable, for example. They have to also have an active listening skills, because they are supposed to ask and wait for the answers. So they have to give the opportunity to the participants to respond and paraphrase whenever they need, or if they needed to summarize the response, they have to give them the opportunity also to complete the discussion. They have to have an observation skills also, because as we said, either you would have only a facilitator or a facilitator and an observer. So we have to make sure that it would be the participants or the facilitator, they have to also look at the participants' body language in order to make sure that anything that would be from the dynamic factors effect that we discussed, it would be also noticed within the discussion. They have to have a good speaking communication skills within the knowledge of the topic that you are looking for and within the language that you are hoping to use to encourage the participants to keep discussing and to keep their responses ongoing. They need to have a flexibility to adapt to the flow. So one of the methods that we said is that they would go within the moderator, and the respondents, they would have to adapt to the method that they are going to use in the response. So if they are using an open questions, let's say, and they are changing the discussion, for example, they need to know how to go back to the flow on the topic without requesting them to stop, for example, or without using any physical behavior that will stop them from continuing to give you the responses. They have to have also the ability to remain impartial, which means that they would be involved and they would have to maintain it with both verbal and non-verbal objectivity within the complete discussion for the participants to continue. Plus that, sometimes they would have to have a sense of humor just to make sure that the participants will feel more relaxed, but this would have to be depending on the topic that you are looking for and what kind of shared information are you hoping from the participants to get. So usually it would be mainly looking from generally to have the human connection between the participants and this facilitator that you are choosing to start your focus group. Thirdly, whenever you are going to choose the correct facilitator and you had a valid reason to use the focus group, you need to know how are you going to report this method. So why did you choose this method and how are you going to report it within the results with the data that you collected? Plus that, you have to make sure that you are going to be aware of any bias affecting the group discussion, because as we mentioned, you're not supposed to lead them into a specific answer. And ensure a clear pathway between the data that you're going to obtain from the focus group discussion and the analysis phase. So how are you going to code it and how are you going to continue the process of analyzing this data that you got from the focused group? Okay. I think this is the last of the PowerPoint slides. Do you have any questions? These are, by the way, the references that are used and some references that you can use later on if you are looking to use the questionnaire or a focus group in any research. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise it now. Dr. Abdelmanam, I think that I took longer than 30 minutes, right? Sorry for that.
But it was wonderful. Thank you very much. Yani, you exceeded the time a little bit, but I think they are happy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's important. Let us ask them if they have any questions, please. Tamam. Thank you very much, Ghaida.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, attendees.